So it's been almost 6 months since last tutorial and it's finally time to come back with some new stuff. Glad to see you all here again. You guys pretty much know what we're gonna do today. But before we start, I'd wanted to take a chance and give huge shout out to my fellow Alex and promote his project 2DEAD2DIE. This guy is truly great musician, and this episode is pretty much brought to you by him. So I would be more than grateful if you guys could check out full version of this song by following link in the description, and show our friends some support. Since the series started to get little boring, I decided to bring new approach to the process, which basically leads us to new level of production, and I hope that you guys will enjoy it same as I did. So let's do the shit. This time we're going to use offline bounce option of Superior Drummer. It means that instead of going for real-time processing, we will get multi-track pack of audio and realign it later in drums mix session. I know you all hate the idea of template separation and all that, but first of all, having all this stuff in one project is simply impossible to handle for an average PC like mine. Second of all, content of offline bounce will give us more options to play with, like the ability to separate direct signal and bleed, post-edit the channels and much more. And third thing is the fact that you can give much more attention to how you program your drums. Sometimes it can be hard to decide if programming move is right when you hear it over polished and mix-ready processing chain, so we're going full hardcore true cult and maximum swag this time. Check this out. What's cool about this drum track is the fact that I received it with randomized notes. You can see these little offsets on each one of them. This leads to slightly more natural and human-like sounding. There is also velocity variations for snare rolls and blasts and all that stuff, which again, means more sound variations and proper dynamic feeling of some real ass drummer. Speaking of drum kit, I use Metal Foundry SDX. Let's not get into boring details with it, just as always it will be in the additional files pack. No any internal processing, and I pretty much maxed out all the bleed, in only exception of OH drummer channel. We will use it as additional mic for ride, so I turn off everything but these 3 rides. When MIDI is edited, it's time to print our shit, so at first, be sure to move your playback locator at the very beginning of the track. Then open this bounce window. Activate direct signal split to get bleed and direct hits in separate files. Also be sure that microphone split of overheads and kick is selected as well. This will separate overheads content to individual cymbals. Press record button and only after that, again, only after you can start the playback, not before. Doing the opposite can lead to unwanted tempo offset in bounced audio. So right now Superior is checking out your drums and you need to wait until this dude make it to the end. Hit the stop button and check out this biggest amount of samples. It has nothing to do with the music production, so it's finally time to hit that bounce button. Choose location to save your files and give it some time to print the audio. And before we will go to next step, be sure to export this MIDI file. We will need it right now. Since the first days on this earth, our parents told us that if you mix your drums without triggers, it's gonna sound weak as fuck. So let's take that advantage and be sure that we come prepared. This project will give us 2 triggers for kick and 1 for snare. That's how they sounds. I believe that I took this stuff out of Metal Mixing Guide 18 template, so let's skip the part where I repeat myself and do basic overview of what's happening. Trigger kit is Superior Drummer in multi-out mode. This kit includes only 2 kicks and snare. Same for mixer, I don't choose other mix. Then straight out of them fire depths of Superior these 2 go to self-titled channels. Superior Kick then sums up with another instrumental channel on Kick's bus. Same for snare tracks and self-titled bus. All the presets for these will be included in the files pack too, so let's save some more time by skipping them. Processing of Superior Kick looks like this. At first I apply slight reduction of attack. Then process it with SSL channel using factory kick drum preset. Fix the timbre with EQ. Apply some saturation from NLS channel. Slight boost of low end with our bass. Even out some stuff. And some more with another EQ. Very last compressor is working in sidechain mode, driven by a send from snare bulb. This gives some priority to snare in case if both will be used at the same moment of time. Kick SSD. Little EQ shape at first. SSL compressor to glue the sound. Vintage compressor for tiny bit of saturation and level boost. Last EQ deals with problem zones on highs. So now both kicks summing up on kick triggered bus. First thing is compression to glue them together. Then we have couple of equalizers which I use to find better timbral balance. Each one is different stage of searching for proper sound. Don't be confused by it. It's just my method of work where you building things on top things. Of course I could reunite this entire shape with only one EQ, but in this case it would be outstanding amount of bands, or simplified equalization model, which means loss of the original sounding. And last thing in this chain is CLA 76 to add some fatness to the sound. Now let's move to snares starting from this one. First movement is pretty extreme EQ shape to make sounding more tight and prepared for post-processing. During building of processing chain I returned to it multiple times, adding some things, so as a single unit it may look little weird. SSL compressor helps to focus 30 milliseconds attack just a bit. Oh shit, looks like I decided to cheat and used preset from End My Suffering expansion for Pro Q. NLS for that extra bit of saturation and stereo randomization. Envelope shaper to get rid of sustained tails. Next one. So processing of snare SSD is pretty much the same algorithm that I used on Kick SSD. In only exception of last EQ, one of the bands is not there anymore. Frankly I don't remember why. Snare bulb. First thing in chain is this EQ where I dropped rainy frequencies on mids and tightened up them highs. And then I used gate to limit roomy sustain tail. Now all snares go to this snare trigger bus. First thing in chain is proceed for a bit of gluing. Then I used equalizer to make the sound little more bright and aggressive. Multibin compressor. Here we only use first and fourth bands to get control on low end punch and also form proper attack for highs. Next EQ is basically compilation of few processing moves at one unit. At first I use some equalization in attempts to find proper tone. Then I use mid-side panner to get rid of all the side content. And then use 9 dB attenuation. I really don't know why I missed it, but I pretty much boosted it back with next limiter. Main goal here was to limit the spiky attack of the snare. Envelope shaper for same sustain control purposes. And Pro Q for final timbre polishing. May sound like a stupid move now, but you will get the idea when we will blend it with main drum mix. Avatar sub-kick. Purpose of this trigger is pretty obvious, so inside of Superior I only used KD sub-channel. And then applied low-pass filtering to get rid of that boxness on mids. It doesn't sound that bad, but at this point I already called this channel sub, so there was no way back. Now we're finally done with processing and the only thing left is batch export. Choose channels and buses with X marker at the end of their names and start batch export. It's finally time to sum things up and give it some processing, so I just uploaded bounced multitrack with triggers into this project and this is how it's going to sound by the end of the day. Even though it looks massive, we mostly gonna go for group processing. So first of all I routed all 4 kick mix to kicks bus. Avatar sub-kick goes there as well. There is no any processing on these channels, I only balanced them in this kind of proportion so most of the tone comes from tight and dry internal microphones. balance of sub-kick is default only because trigger bounce already included proper levels. Then I routed all 3 kick bleed track to self-titled bus, just to apply basic low-cut filtering and keep low and cleaner. And since bleed tracks are grouped together, I use this bus to slightly boost amount of bleed. No level changes or any processing on the actual channels. This bus then goes to kick's bus. Speaking of kick trigger, there is no any processing too. Same as kick's bus, it goes straight to drums out. Since I already got tight sounding from trigger, I did not want to lose that tone, but at the same time it sounded kind of lifeless and too aggressive, so I decided to diminish presence of other kicks in the mix so it acts more like transition between trigger and the actual drum kit. It sort of glues things together. So as a first move I applied 80% spectral match to make it closer to one of source parts of the trigger, just as a starting point. Continue spectral polishing by filtering out unwanted lows and highs with couple zones in the mids. At this point I decided to apply some compression with factory kick preset, just to get basic control over dynamics, nothing extreme. Even out some more zones again. Limiter helps to get control on peak dynamics and put this bus deeper in mix. Final timbre polishing. Since our trigger has pretty tight lows and highs, we don't really need that much on other kick, but at the same time there was something I really liked about mid-range content of this thing, so I decided to switch main focus to mids by reduction of few zones on lows and highs. And now both parts of total kick works in conjunction. Speaking of sends from these channels, we have sends to reverb bus, which is the keeper of space of our drum mix. Later we will export it as separate stem to be used in master project. Both have sends to bass and guitar sidechain tracks. I will explain what it is later. Last element is send to sidechain compressor on ambience bus. By doing this we will bring some punch to our drum mix. Speaking of snares, it's kind of the same story. 3 bleed tracks and 2 top microphones are routed to self-titled buses. These buses and snare bottom mic then go to snare bus, which then, same as snare trigger, goes to drums out. Again, there is no any processing on trigger channel. Just some level and timing corrections. If you look at them waveforms, you can notice this little offset. Frankly, I have no idea why. Bounced audio is raw and unprocessed, while this trigger channel suffered shit ton of processing, so I kind of expected this offset, but in complete opposite direction. Anyways, same as our kicks, we're gonna process this snare in a way of sound transition unit. First thing I did is balanced bleed tracks. Probably because I thought that top mix will have more priority, so top bleed should as well. On snare bleed bus I used EQ to decrease outstanding noises coming from crash. And also dropped the level. Moving on to snare top, there is no processing on channels, only little level correction to give more priority to condenser mic because it sound fuller and not so noisy. Then I used EQ on snare top bus, just to deal with annoying mid-range and dispensable sub-lows. Right after I use our bass to add solid dose of body to snare and make it more powerful. I used this plugin with same settings on bottom mic as well, so let's compare overall effect for both later. Final EQ with subtle reduction of 2 mid-range resonances. Snare bottom. First and most obvious thing about the sound here is noisy sustained tail. So I reduce it with envelope shaper as much as this plugin allows me to. Still not enough, but at this point I decided to try some EQ. Here is what I come up with. You can see that I used output gain to compensate timbre losses. As a result, we simply move the focus out of these problem zones. Another envelope shaper to reduce the tail again. This time it sounds short enough. Same our bass exciter, but we leave it unprocessed just yet and move to snare bus first. First thing is SSL compressor, which helps us to form basic attack. Next, EQ makes sound tighter and cleaner on mids. Multiband compressor with all bands active in exception of first one. This step will help us to glue tracks together even more and finalize forming of proper attack. I use 20 milliseconds value for second band, just because it is lower so transient should be longer. For third and fourth bands I use 10 milliseconds attack value and also apply little gain compensation for third one. Since we applied pretty extreme amount of compression, we starting to get way much more bleed noises, so I used EQ to smooth it up a bit. Then applied limiter to cut them peaks and boost the volume at the same time. Finally, last EQ to even out all unwanted stuff. I used this EQ during playback of both snare bus and snare trigger, so it makes sense in context of both, though may look stupid in case of solo processing. And only at this stage I applied them our bass exciters. Check this out. Much better now. Same as our kicks, these two also have same kind of sense to reverb. Guitar and bass sidechain tracks plus ambience sidechain compressor. Toms. Did not use any processing or level changes on channels. Bleed tracks are routed to Tom's bleed bus, only to get this equalization. We don't need anything below 150 Hz, plus there I reduced ringy whistle which coming from snare drum bleed. This bus then goes to Tom's bus. Direct channels of both rack and floor toms go to similar named buses with pretty much similar processing. Let me demonstrate it with floor tom's bus. First thing is timbre correction with custom impulse. Just as always, these and all the other impulses will be available in the additional files pack. Second movement is H-comp compressor for basic control of dynamics. Then I use EQ to boost the low end and at the same time bring back resonating zone which started to be a problem after the boost. Last element is limiter to get control on peak level of this bus. Processing of rack toms is pretty much the same thing, in few exceptions. First of all, we have bigger gain level on K5R. Same settings of compressor. Since rack toms have higher tonal content, I used to go for different EQ, this time having shorter and louder boost of lows with different resonance reduction. Same limiter for same purposes. And now both buses go to Tom's bus. Here I use same limiter settings with slight boost of gain, but this is not the case. Main reason to have it here, even though we already limited both rack and Tom's buses, their attacks still can stack together. After all that, signal from this bus goes to drums out. Speaking of sends, both rack and Tom's buses have this send to ambient sidechain compressor. And we also have send to reverb from Tom's bus. Hi-hat. Close and bleed channels are balanced like this. Both routed to hat's bus. Just to get additional level change and send to reverb. This one is routed to drums out. Overheads. As I already said, this group only includes direct cymbal hits, so right and overheads bleed is not included. You can see that some channels are empty. It's because our drum arrangement missed these cymbal hits, so there was nothing to bounce. All of them tracks don't have any processing or level correction and routed straight to overheads bus. Here I use EQ to get rid of unwanted low end, pretty common stuff for overheads, though in most cases it's not so radical. I also used this gain compensation to replace old levels of overheads, that's why them channels have no level changes. SSL compressor with OHM preset to make the sound fuller and focus attack of some cymbals. Last EQ for final timbre polish. After that this bus goes to drums out. And there is also send to reverb. All 3 tracks of rides are based on the same processing model. Same as some symbols, we missed 2 ride tracks because of not using it in the arrangement. Speaking of processing, first thing is ProQ, which I used as gain staging plugin, just to get hotter and calming level on NLS, which by the way have pretty solid amount of drive. EQ right after will help us to deal with 2 ringy zones around 500 Hz and also get rid of unwanted presence. Same as other 2, this track is routed to drums out and have the send to reverb. Ride Mono and Ride Uber Mod are using exact same audio of OH Drummer. So on Ride Mono I used ProQ with same settings as previous rides. The only difference is outcoming gain. I decided to get my levels here, because channel fader's maximum limit is just 6 decibels. Right after I use stereo enhancer to get rid of all side information and turn it to mono. As a result now we get stronger presence of ride in the center of mix. And for Ride Uber Mod I use self-titled plugin with warm and warby preset, and I don't know how to describe why I did this, just listen to it. Fucking awesome. The only difference here is incoming, outcoming and noise gain controls. Incoming level change helped me to get proper amount of overdrive. Noise gain reduction allows me to keep this channel much cleaner, because noise is not what I wanted from it. On top of Valhalla I use same EQ for same purposes. Same as main ride tracks, these routed to drums out. Last overhead part is bleed track, which includes bleed from toms, kick, snare and hi-hat. So I used EQ to get control on problem noises coming from these. Low-end bands helps to get rid of boomy part of kick drum bleed. Resonance cut is for snare ring, and low-pass filter mostly reduce outstanding presence of hi-hat. Same as others, This channel goes to drums out. Final element of our drum kit is for ambience mix. All of them routed to ambience bus, but there is actual processing on each channel, so let's check it out starting from ambience near. As first movement, I use isotope major to make stereo much wider on lows and mids. Then cut ringy snare drum bleed with Pro Q. Ambience FAR processing model is based on same algorithm. This time I used less stereo enhancement on first band. And additional resonance reduction on Pro Q. Ambience mono FAR. Only one resonance cut here. Ambience mono near. Same resonance cut and extreme boost of low end because of lack of lows on this one. On top of things, I use 100% panning to the right. Just to make things little more random, why not? And speaking of ambience bus, first thing is T-Rack's British channel with factory preset called Squash My Room. Then I used EQ to get rid of some unwanted lows which are not essential in this case. Then I compress everything above 2 kHz with multi-bin compressor. This way I deal with outstanding high end which could be a problem for overhead's clarity. Sidechain compressor. Remember I told you about this one? Check this out. Well, it seems that I lied about the kick. It doesn't make almost any sense, but we still get attenuation from snare, which is 100% needed because of its ringy nature, same as for toms. For some reason room bleed from them becomes too outstanding, so with this compressor we deal with it. Right after we polish the sound with EQ. Apply additional stereo enhancement. This time it gets closer to context of the actual drum kit. And after I use Pro Q. Higher band works in regular mod, while lower one is only applied for mid part of the stereo. As a result we get fatter mid-range presence in the center. At the end of the day this bus goes to drums out, so let's go there too, shall we? First thing here is custom timbre correction impulse. Not something crazy, it just makes the sound more transparent by dealing with problem frequencies of the entire Metal Foundry library. Then I use stereo imager to slightly enhance the presence. You already know what this X marker stands for. So another part of batch export is reverb bus. Let's check it out. Here I use Valhalla Vintage with default preset. Then deal with outstanding low end and dark highs. On top of that, I use 23 dB attenuation as level controller. At the end of the chain I use same two plugins which we use on drums out to get same kind of filtering. And very last things are these bass and guitar sidechain driver tracks. We're gonna bounce these as well and then use to apply sidechain compression and bass and guitar processing templates. Both of these channels routed to silencer track, which simply have zero output. So it's possible to mix down the audio from driver tracks and at the same time it won't bother you with unnecessary audition when you don't need it. That's how these drivers sounds like. We're finally done with processing and it's time to render the files. Before you do it, I suggest to use oversampling wherever it's possible. Also use higher lengths on keyword units, something around 20 milliseconds, This way you can minimize spectrum matching artifacts. I use lower values only for filming purposes, so I'm able to run both audio and video capture software on the background. So set up your render zone, open up export window, turn on batch channel export, choose drums out, reverb, bass sidechain and guitar sidechain tracks for export. So guitar processing here is fairly simple. We have two guitar tracks panned 87% to the left and 85% to the right, both routed to GTR post bus, just to get additional stereo imaging and sidechain ducking. Remember we've got guitar sidechain track from drums mix? You can see it right here, it's routed straight to sidechain compressor on GTR bus, so it's silently taking its place. Processing of each channel is the same, so we'll review only one of them. Check this out. First plugin in chain is Guitar Processor Revolver 4. Here I use treble booster to make signal much more dry and aggressive. Then overdrive pedal. Then signal hits 6505. After that I use impulse loader with these settings. There is pretty solid amount of ambience reverb. We're gonna use this advantage to enhance that roomy presence later, but for some weird reason I found out that sound of reverb is changing each time you open the plugin, so if you experience any problems with it, just turn it off. It won't give negative effect in context of the entire mix. On the output mixer I use some EQ. And gain compensation. Speaking of the input mixer, here's the settings. After Revolver I use NLS with stereo mode and maximum drive. Because of such a huge impact to the sound, it's critical to use same Navo 1 preset, otherwise you can get slightly different tone, because each one of them have this little difference, and the more you drive it, the more obvious this difference gonna be. If you decided to turn off Revolver's room, you can go ahead and switch this controller to dual mono, because if you don't use room, your signal pretty much loses all the side components. So it basically hits NLS with identical left and right channel content. Hitting this tubular will mean that those channels will be processed in a slightly different way, and as a result you will get back some of that width and stereo randomization. And this stereo enhancer is basically what exaggerates that stereo content, no matter what road you decided to go. And then I use matching impulse which unites all post-equalization applied to guitars in the mix. plus make it little more lower in volume. Just as always, you'll find these in the additional file pack. Now both tracks hit GTR post bus. Here's the sidechain compressor. You may not really hear the difference at this point, it's not that big really, but if I boost drive signal you can get it pretty clear. Check this shit. Right after I use stereo imager to correct the width of guitars. It may look weird in solo, but again, I did it with tracks summed all together, just separated them templates then to make things simpler, cause this time we basically miss main mixing stage and go straight for stem mastering. From this channel I also have the send to reverb bus with same settings of Valhalla Vintage Verb and Pro Q. And imager just matches settings of the one from GTR post bus. And yes, by the way, I get asked a lot about all these glitchy effects and all that, so just to clear things up about this part at the end. This is just offline pitch correction. First thing I did is separated the audio between main part and this last note. Then applied pitch drop from 0 straight down to 16 semitones without using time correction. This allowed me to get needed effect and also make this ending longer, because note I started with was pretty short, and then I just boosted the fuck out of the incoming audio so it sounds more dirty. Moving forward, same as with drums, set up your export zone. Open up the render window and start batch export from them channels marked with X. Speaking of bass, oh boy, things goes a little more complicated. First of all, let's do little comparison with raw unprocessed signal. As you can see, this time we work with live bass, so I pretty much use the same audio for all tracks in only exception of final note. I cut the tail of bass raw for it. So this is what happening. These three channels marked with orange color is our main bass tone. It includes raw sounding, processing with SHB amp, and processing with R47 distortion. All three tracks are routed to bass main bus for spectral correction. Then I separate this audio to bass delay and bass Kramer FX channels. Just as always, doing it by turning off the output and applying sends. Just because in Cubase I can't have more than one output at the same moment of time. So one part is gonna be our stereo delay, and another one is distorted with Kramer tape. These two channels then routed to bass bus, just to get sidechain ducking, final timbre correction and stereo enhancement. Track bass GTR is basically reamping chain of guitars with custom impulse response, so it goes straight to bass bus to sum up with other elements. Let's start from individual channels. On bass raw I used limiter for pre-processing peak level control. Right after, Bass Rider Live. This pair of plugins will upper the level of bass and make it more stable in the mix. However, though it also brings up some unwanted random ducking, but I still was pretty happy with the sound, so fuck that. Bass SHB. Limiter at the first place, just to protect bass overdrive pedal from peak overloading and dirty sound. Here's the settings of BOD. As you can notice, this time I use mixture of processed and DI signals. SHB amp to spice things up. Then I use Pro Q to get rid of some zones and prevent it from conflicts with other elements of the tone. Then I use pair of compressor and limiter. Compressor is gonna do basic dynamic control routine, while limiter cut them unwanted peaks. Mono delay will basically form specific phase correlation between this and raw channel. Notice that I don't say fix, because in this case I found that phase correlation wasn't quite right at the very last stages of mixing, where it was too late to fix anything without ruining the mix. Proper way of doing it would be to move this delay to bass raw channel, then reverse its phase. But as I said, because of the fact that I already done working with my tones, it sounded like shit, so I decided to leave things as they are. Bass R47. First thing is pair of low cut equalization and R47 distortion pedal. I use low cut filter to make sounding of distortion more focused. However, it's just an option. Removing the EQ will give you more kind of choking and fuzzy sounding. Then I pretty much limit spectral content and only leave part of the mids which I liked more. Because of such a radical cuts, we don't need to care about using raw distortion with no cabinet just yet. Last thing is something that I started to question when it was too late. This limiter will basically crush sounding of this channel, make its dynamics stable and less obvious in the mix, so it's kinda take the place, but you can also decide to delete this element and get more dynamic tone. Now all three channels sums up on GTR main bus where I have cabinet impulse. Then, as I already said, it gets separated for parallel processing. First element is Kramer tape with factory clean bass DI preset. It helps to get slightly more aggressive sounding. And another part is delay chain. So I use H delay with these settings. Then even out some zones so it won't sound muddy together with Kramer channel. And then decrease amount of stereo to prevent it from sounding outside of bass context. I did not do this in case of this particular song, but you probably need to apply level automation to drop this signal at the moments of bass stops, staccatos or something like that depending of how your song is built. The thing is that in context of constantly playing bass, you can't really hear this delay in the mix, but when bass stops and you need that stop to be tight with no delay, you can just use level automation to drop the signal, or you can also do it on final stem. Speaking of levels, I give more priority to Kramer part for obvious reasons. There is also sidechain sense to bass GTR channel with these amounts. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. Speaking of bass GTR, I use low cut filter for same reasons as on R47, but in this case effect is very subtle. Revolver's settings is the same as we used on guitars. Basically that's why low cut doesn't give that much of effect, we already use treble booster. Same in LS for same purposes. The only difference is that now I use Navo 3 and mono version of software. Custom impulse response to simulate the cabinet. And sidechain compressor driven by bass main channels. Using this, we apply radical gain reduction to high gain part of our bass, so if bass play aggressive and loud notes, we have less of this high gain component. It creates more room for clean tone. Okay, so now all the elements sums up in this bus. First thing is sidechain compressor. Same as I did on guitars, but this time we use different drive track for bass. Impulse response will finish forming of our bass tone. And a major with same settings as I used on the alt of drums. Then I use 10 dB attenuation to be sure that our stem won't have any clipping. There is also send to reverb bus, where I use exact same settings of Valhalla and Pro Q. Level of this channel is lowered as well. So now we can finally set up our rendering zone, and start batch export from channels marked with X. Last part of our mix before start of stem mixing is additional set of triggers. Unlike the previous set, this one is gonna be added on top of compressed instrumental to create additional drum clarity. So let's start from master kick. To sample it I use Kick 10 SSD. In the internal mixer I turn off the room and applied this kind of envelope processing. It will limit the length of our sample to just 40 milliseconds, so we can compress and saturate the hell out of it and still have short tight sounding. First EQ has this kind of shape to form basic sounding in front of the chain. Then I use SPL Transient Designer to enhance the attack and also decrease sustain, which by the way will give us some cool results. This sustain control only makes sense in case of double kick parts. It won't reduce that much on single kick hits, simply because we already limited its length, but when kick starts to play fast enough, it gets dropped. This difference will be less massive because of post-processing, but it's still gonna be there all the time. After that I use another EQ to form massive focus on high mids. This leads to more aggressive sounding. NLS saturation with compensated output. CLA compressor to smooth things up and decrease them level drop differences, plus we have slightly fuller sounding. Spectrum matching to some reference kick that I used in some of my previous works. Little more frequency correction and gain staging. And final exciter to get some of that tape saturation. And other element is master snare. Here I only use snare 10 SSD sample. And turned off the room. No any processing. We also have these channel delays for same purposes as on other drum triggers. I still don't get why these delays moving back and forth, but using these settings will prevent our triggers from desynchronization with main instrumental. Once we're done with processing, set up your rendering zone and start batch export from these. So it's finally time to sum all our stems together and give the song final touch. As you can see here, I uploaded all stems and triggers which we prepared earlier, plus rendered new track for noise. Basically it's just Valhalla Uber mod with warm and warbly preset. It will sound like this if you drop mix amount to 50%. All of them tracks in exception of master triggers are routed to pre-master bus, where they get compensation of 10 dB attenuation and some glue multiband compression. Then this bus sums up with triggers on master bus for final processing. We're gonna do our mix down straight from it. So let's go for stem post-processing starting from guitars. First unit is Classic Clipper by T-Rax. This one will give us a lot of saturation, which can be controlled by level changes of printed audio. You can see those right here. So if I attenuate some part, pure effect will be slight level drop and also reduced saturation at the same time. Right after I deal with two unwanted zones and also make sound brighter. apply additional correction of stereo image. Use sidechain compressor on top. Even though we already used it when prepared our stems, I decided to bring even more of that pumping into the mix. This one is mostly driven by master snare, but there is also a bit of reduction from master kick. And final timbre correction, which will make our sound little more scooped. Guitar reverb. Occasionally I forgot to delete the processing from these. If you recall, we used same kind of EQ and stereo imaging, but what's done is done. I tried to delete it, but it made the sounding weaker, so I decided to leave it all here. Same appears for other reverb stems. Speaking of level automation, I used solid boost of incoming audio at same parts where guitar track getting attenuation. As a result, for these parts we get less aggressive, and much bigger sounding. Even though it's hard to spot in the full mix, it's never bad to have few little touches here and there. Bass stem. Same as on guitars here, I used clipper at first. However, settings seems to be less aggressive. So most of the time incoming audio level is default, but at some parts I applied 1 dB boost to bring extra saturation for bass, like these parts at the very beginning. And then I applied some more level changes for parts where delay takes its place. For example, here we have fast snare over the bass, so I felt like I can bring it up a little and have richer mix without making delay too obvious. And at the next pause, snare plays twice slower, so this time I noticed that delay becomes too obvious and used automation to bring it down. Another example is this drumless section. Since we already made our guitars big, I thought it can be a good idea to do the same with bass delay. You can barely hear it in full arrangement, but it still makes this part more interesting in my opinion. Anyways, going back to the processing. After clipper I use stereo imager for width correction. Massive amount of drops on problem parts of the spectrum according to interaction with guitars and other elements. Even more cuts. And finally sidechain ducking. This time it mostly comes from kick. Processing of bass reverb is the same as on guitars. And speaking of level changes, I only boosted that tonal drop at the end of the song. Drums. No level automation here, and I only use stereo imaging to fine-tune mid-side balances according to the sounding of other stems. Same in major here on reverb. And I actually use some level boosts at the start of the song, mostly to make that solo snare bigger. So I think you get the idea of these level movements. By applying this kind of stem automation you can emphasize some parts of the song, or maybe make it less dense. It's like you talking to the listener and trying to bring his attention to some sections, or sometimes just hide something which doesn't sound good for you. Kick trigger. So as you can hear, this trigger adjustment is very subtle thing, nothing crazy. With first processing move I fix the timbre so it sounds more transparent with main drum track. Then use compressor to bring a bit of the punch and saturation. Last timbre correction to really polish things up. You can see that I used audio level automation to bring up that very first hit of the kick. As a side effect we boost sidechain reduction. At this moment it's around 7 dB, so we kind of focus that intro punch on kick. And now sends to sidechain compressors for guitars and bass. I used multiple sends to bass when attempted to find proper level, so once you add another send, it just stacking up with previous one and so on. I'm not sure that I could properly recalculate it. I also used phase reverse on this channel to fix some issues with main drum track. It gives us slightly more sub-lows. And speaking of master snare, it follows same processing algorithm. Cleaning EQ. Some compression. And one more cut right after. Speaking of automation, I only use 2 dB boost of this double stroke at the very end, just to emphasize it a little more. Uber mod noise track. So as I said, this one is just to control sonic tension of the mix. There is no any post-processing, I've only applied some level boosts at the same parts as on guitars or bass, so it really blends into the mix. Now all the tracks in exception of triggers sums on this pre-master bus. Here I used boost of incoming sensitivity to compensate stem attenuations. This allowed us to safely transfer the audio without clipping cause it was always in the green zone. Speaking of compressor, it works in mid-side mode. For side part I only compress lower mid-range, mostly to put toms deeper in mix and have just a tiny bit more control on guitars. And for center I only deal with levels of low-end mixture of bass and kick on first band. Then do the same for snare on second band. As a result, we leave enough headroom for our triggers to stay tight and really pack things up together. So now all our elements finally faces that master group. At first I applied Kramer tape processing to glue things together with saturation. Then I use EQ to deal with unwanted content on highs and also bring up some of that low end. After that, I added new EQ at the very beginning of chain to fine-tune response of saturator. Second, multi-bin compressor. This time we're targeting for packing triggers together with other elements. So for center I deal with everything but high end. Second band works in parallel mode, so I still keep half of uncompressed signal. And for side component, I only did slight compression of mids. Second band have this level compensation, so instead of ducking, we make things more full and beefy. And because of the fact that third band is not compensated, we just move sonic focus to lower parts of the spectrum. Clipper will make our side more aggressive and also make work of the limiter more stable. Last, saturation touch with NLS bus. This will give us slight randomization of stereo image. And I also used output attenuation to prevent next plugin from incoming overload. Limiter at the end of the chain. And one more thing right in front of it. Here I added Decaclar module from old Isotope RX3, but you can pretty much replace it with the one from 5th or 6th version. What it's gonna do is even out some harshness out of the sound. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but it just feels smoother. This processing unit is only used for audio mixdown, because even on low quality settings, it takes too much of my CPU. High quality modes simply make things not audible at all, and I also need to turn on oversampling on other plugins. So I decided to cheat and replace the audio from intro demonstration with high quality rendering including this plugin, and you already know how it sounds. So that's pretty much it. And for those of you who want to get additional files pack, which includes pack of 7 Cubase projects which I used in this video, pack of source DI and MIDI files, full pack of impulses used in this guide, master snapshot for Isotope Ozone 5 EQ and presets for other Isotope modules, preset bank for Revolver 4, full pack of Pro Q presets, same pack of templates for Reaper, presets for SSD4 and Superior Drummer with custom drum map for MIDI programming. You will find all of them shits in my private post on Patreon, which will be available after pledging $1. By doing this you will also get access for rest of my private content and help me keep doing what I do. Link is in the description. So hope you learned thing or two from this guide. See you next time.